Thank you everyone for joining us today for another session of MentorCore. This is our last session before we begin our summertime schedule, which involves a little more time off for Dan and for me. My name is Lisa Beth Lentini Walker. I run a compliance, ethics, and corporate governance consulting firm called Lumen Worldwide Endeavors. And I am one of the co-founders of MentorCore, which is a community for compliance, security, and risk professionals, where we can help each other develop and grow on our own terms. And we're really excited to have you here today. Dan, do you want to tell them a little bit about you?
Sure, and coming to you from MentorCore West today, a remote location, secure remote location. My name is Dan Ayala. I'm an information security and privacy leader and founder of Socratic, a strategic security and privacy consultancy focused on virtual Ciso and privacy officer work. But in addition to that, nothing gives me more joy than helping people grow their careers, especially in the security and privacy field. And over the past number of years, really grown this amazing appreciation for how close compliance and ethics, risk, governance, security, and privacy are. And it's been a pleasure to create MentorCore and help bring people in and across these great fields. But there's really not much better than that, except for having these great discussions. And for that, we're really excited to have Tomas Maldonado join us today. Tomas, welcome.
Thank you for having me, folks. And it's nice to be here. I feel the excitement and the energy just from both of your intros. And, hopefully I won't let people down, and, we'll speak, we'll give some good advice today.
Yeah, so I met you on Clubhouse, and this is one of the great gifts that I've found from the Clubhouse community. I had the opportunity to hear you, and I have to say, when you spoke, I was just inspired, and I thought, oh my goodness, there are other people that may not have access to Clubhouse who are interested in these professions, who absolutely have to hear about your journey and about your perspectives and some of the ways that you think about your profession and your career and how these overlaps have happened. So as we get started, can you tell us a little bit about you and your background and kind of what brought you to the profession you're in right now, where you're the CISO of the NFL, uber famous organization, but where did it all start?
Well, it's like anything, right, Lisa? It was a calling. I woke up one morning, I woke up with this calling and said, hey, you need to be a security professional, and CISO is going to be your title. No, I wish
it happened. It happened while I was asleep.
Yeah, exactly. That's while I was asleep, and I was CISO. Look, I wish I could say it was something to that extent, but I stumbled into security. I stumbled into the profession of doing cybersecurity. It was something that, when I started to grow my career, and I'll maybe go a little bit back and give you a bit more about my origin story. So obviously I'm from New York, Puerto Rican, born and raised in New York, lived part of my time while I was in Puerto Rico when I was younger, moved back to New York and really grew up, in New York City, in the Bronx, New York. Grew up from New York City public school system. Went to Fordham University, which is in both in New York and in Manhattan. I went to the Bronx campus, Bronx and Manhattan. I went to the Bronx campus, and that's where I started to develop my, I'll call it skill in technology, skill in analytical thinking and thought process around, what I wanted to ultimately do as a career choice, if you will. But I still didn't really know exactly what I wanted to do. I graduated with a computer science degree, learned a lot about computer science. I always said I didn't really like the programming side of computer science, but I liked the analytical thinking and that thought process that entailed and that you developed as you would sort of going throughout your undergraduate career. The latter part of my undergraduate career, I'm going to date myself here, and at risk of maybe not sounding too old, is, the internet started to evolve, right? Things like email. I remember when email started to evolve, and you got an email, maybe one email a month, and you were like, wow.
And it was like, whoa, it's like mail.
Like somebody actually sent you an email, right? And that's, things like AOL started, actually this was before AOL, but AOL started to popularize it, right? You've got mail, and you can see that in different movies. But around that time period, the internet started to evolve and take shape, and I gravitated towards learning a lot more around the internet and networking as a whole. So when I was ready to leave my college career and enter into my professional career, I naturally progressed into a role of one, I had no idea what I wanted to do. And so I took me a little bit longer to find a job because I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. And people that are trying to hire kids coming out of college, they're trying to put them into different categories, right? Are you going to be a programmer? Are you going to be networking? Are you going to be, I don't know. So we'll put you into the help desk. So I went into a help desk position at a company called Bloomberg. And I learned very quickly what I didn't like doing. And what I didn't like doing was actually having an earpiece in my head and answering the phone every 2 seconds and having to support I worked at Bloomberg, so most of my customers, interested enough, were trading people, right? Think about what you use the Bloomberg terminal for. So, getting yelled at was probably a daily occurrence. It's like, oh, this Bloomberg keyboard doesn't work. Well, it's how does it connect in? Does it have a cord? No, it doesn't have a cord. Well, have you ever thought about flipping that keyboard over and seeing there's a battery in there? Oh, yes, there's a battery in there. Here's the battery. And next thing you know, 2 minutes later, the phone would hang up because they solved their problem. But what I quickly realized, and the reason why I give you that backdrop, is what I quickly realized was that I knew that my journey and what I could provide in terms of value to other people was more than just answering a phone call. And since I was in this level of influx of not really knowing what I wanted to do career wise, the help desk was a good opportunity for me to figure out, well, I really didn't want to do help desk for a long period of time. And so I started to gravitate more towards what I ultimately decided to do, which was security. But it took me a weird path, right? I wanted to really focus on networking, took an opportunity as a network security officer for a small investment banking firm. I thought it was great because I really enjoyed doing networking and setting up networks and starting to help the underpinnings of what the internet essentially involved. And then I found and discovered something that I really had a good skill in, which was, I don't know if you call this good, bad, and different, but breaking into systems, right? Breaking into networks, breaking into systems. And I found that being able to,
very good.
yeah, well, it depends upon where you end up in your career. If you go the wrong route, breaking into systems is probably not the good approach.
Definitely.
What do they say about Peter Parker? Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. You get to choose what side of that spectrum you want to be on.
But the curiosity is key. That type of curiosity is key, and I would assume if you're anything like me, would follow similar paths. That was what propelled me and really made me interested in what was to come. That poking around, and at the time, without risk of really going to jail.
No, absolutely, right. So look, my dad was a federal officer. My cousins were NYPD cops. My mom was a very stern administrative assistant. So going to jail, it was not an option. Ending up a statistic in in New York City was not an option. And look, I grew up in a very hard-nosed area of the Bronx, and so those were not options that my parents were going to allow me to have. Let's just put it that way, right?
It was frowned upon in my family as well.
Yeah,
right?
and personally, right, I didn't want to end up being that sort of statistic, right? I wanted more for my life, more for my career, and more for my journey, if you will. So look, stumbling into security has been the best stumbling that I've done in my lifetime, in my career. The rest from there, gravitated towards, I'll call them small investment banking companies like Goldman Sachs, a small banking company like JP Morgan Chase, and now, ultimately took a stop in chemical manufacturing, and now I'm ultimately at the NFL, where I'm able to hopefully add value not only to the league, but to the clubs and also to the fans, right? People looking at the sport and sort of gravitating towards what we actually produce on a weekly basis. So it's been an interesting journey, to say the least, and I wouldn't really change it for the world. I've learned a lot, and hopefully I've been able to not only inspire people on my team, people that work for me, but also give back in a small way to the community, to the security community, and to the industry at large.
So, your journey, right? One of the things that's really beautiful about kind of compliance, security, risk audit is you can travel amongst multiple industries. So it sounds like a lot of your experiences were first kind of in that financial space. Was that a targeted space? Was it an opportunity space? And how did you transition from one industry to another? Was there like a big learning curve there? Or tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so look, early on, it wasn't really like I had said, oh, I need to work in financial services versus healthcare versus insurance. Like I didn't really understand the concept of the industries and what the industries meant and sort of what they provided, right? I didn't think about it like that when I was, in my early 20s, right? If you will. I thought about it more along the lines of, well, I need to do simple things like I need to pay my student loan debt, So how can I get a job to pay enough money to cover my student loan debt, right? So my gravitating towards financial services was more opportunistic around the opportunity, and having having an engagement with a recruiter very early on and sharing with them what I found interesting and them helping me match up an industry that was one, hiring, and two, that was looking for the skill set that I had to offer. So that was completely by chance. Right now that I'm, as I think about my career now, and as I started to grow within financial services, I spent 17 years in that world, and in that world, it was great because, what you don't sort of appreciate when you're doing financial services very early on is all of the regulations that are applied to the financial industries in, as the sector as a whole, right? All of these regulations, whether they're good, bad, or indifferent, and however you might, have a perception about them or not, depending upon what political slant you have, they're all for a security professional and for compliance and auditors. Those are all great drivers to help us move the maturity of our program along and help us gain things like funding and resources around what we need to accomplish to help the business essentially be in compliant with a regulation, but also be secure, be an enabler to the business, be a value add to the community that they serve, and beyond, right? So my early on view of which industry I wanted to work for was really by chance. Now, that I've progressed in my career and I've sort of developed, I've strategically aligned myself with highly regulated industries to get that better understanding as to what I'll call it, quote unquote, good looks like, right? If you're a highly regulated industry, chances are you have to implement controls that are above and beyond, the fundamentals and the norm for what could be tolerated from a risk management standpoint for some other industries that might not have that same level of rigor. But it gives you a greater appreciation of what, quote unquote, good looks like, so that when you do transfer to different industries, and I ended up moving into chemical manufacturing and now ultimately to the NFL, you start to bring those good practices and best practices along the journey of where you're progressing in your career, and because they're just good things to do, right? They're I don't want to call them right, but they're fundamentally correct, and they're fundamentally aligned at securing the core components of your business and your business strategy, which ultimately should help any business along the lines of growing their top line growth and revenue targets, right?
Absolutely. And I think it's really interesting. I know I've worked in highly regulated industry as well. And there's very much a difference between the carrot and the stick, right? So
Mhm.
highly regulated, you've got a big stick from the regulatory perspective. When you have less regulated, like there might not be a stick there that you can point to. So, can you tell us a little bit about how you've managed that going from like very highly regulated to I don't know that the NFL is highly regulated, but maybe there are things I don't know. So, tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, so the NFL is, since we have partners with like folks like Visa, we have a lot of partnership with folks like AWS and others. This is all sort of public knowledge, right? Our engagements, our partnerships with Microsoft and others. We engage, and the brand is so huge. It's expected that even though we're not regulated by like the Fed or any other sort of we're not a publicly traded company any longer, so the FTC doesn't regulate. Even though those things don't apply, our rigor and how we execute our security program and how we execute our business is up to the same standards as you would expect for a highly regulated company. So just because we don't have anybody externally watching us, we're still watching ourselves. And we do have obviously audit partners, both internal and external audit, that does provide that level of governance. And then we have a typical board of directors, just like any other company would have, which provide that senior level governance for the business as an operating environment. So those things still apply. Just about everybody that works at the league, and I'm not sort of acting like a spokesperson for the league because I'm not authorized to be that spokesperson, but just from my experience, obviously I spent 17 years in financial services, so they brought in a Ciso that has that backing and that background. There's other members of the league that are in high-ranking positions that have very similar sort of makeup and mindset, if you will, right? So we're always trying to make sure that we do the right thing, and we're not. We want to be at the forefront and at that innovative standpoint of security. If I think about it from what I do and other business lines as well, we're always trying to innovate and be that leader, if you will. The key difference is I don't have to essentially, respond to like an MRA, if you will, like if I was in banking, right? And, I don't have to sort of work through those nuances and say, all right, are we compliant with X, Y, Z? But I still need to make sure that I implement and execute my security program to be compliant with any regulation that would, have an interest in us as an entity.
Fantastic.
Have you had to change your sales approach at all? Your internal sales approach of how you sell security with the lack of the stick? Obviously, everyone has the same ethos and mindset and desire, but have you had to adjust from when you had a very nice, clear stick to we should be doing this, and how you sell those programs internally?
Yeah, so in my current role, it's not as much as it was in my prior role. In my current role, the brand is so big that we do not want to end up being that headline, because anything that we do could become a headline.
Good point.
So that stick is essentially the brand protection side of what we do. And there's tons of stuff. There's tons of initiatives that we have that are geared at protecting the brand, protecting our business, protecting our partners, and protecting you as fans, right? The information that you all have. So it's different than financial services, but we still have the same equivalent stick. But I can share with you, in a prior life when I was in chemical manufacturing, where it was a publicly traded company, not as a very, very visible brand that you might think of, even though you use their products just about every single day of your life. If you've ever heard of Irish Spring or Colgate and Coke and Pepsi, right? Those are all products that you consume. Well, this chemical manufacturing company was part of the supply chain of those products, right? So they made the scent and the taste that goes into or went into those particular products. And so in that environment, it was a lot more influencing and negotiating and trying to help the board and help the business leaders understand the value of security, helping them understand the value that and the enablement that we have from a security standpoint to continue to help them, acquire new companies, grow the business, take more risks, take more chances. That was a complete change for me, leaving financial services where we did have that sort of big stick, if you will, right? And having to almost flip it and put my negotiation skills and influencing skills on steroids, right? Because now it's like, well, why do we need to implement these security controls? Why do we need a firewall? Why do we need intrusion detection? Like these things that you're like, well, if you were in financial services, like it's a no-brainer. It's like, yeah, you need antivirus. It's like water, right? You need this to survive. But when you're in a non-regulated industry, it's really having to justify the value of that dollar that you're going to spend, right? That budgetary item that you're going to spend on that security solution. Like, how is it translating directly into the business continuing to generate revenue? So painting that picture so I spent a good 4.5 years building a security program from the ground up in that chemical manufacturing company I worked for. I didn't work in IT, so it was even I'll call it a different context altogether. I worked for the general counsel, so having to explain to my GC, very technical cyber terms in non-technical speak, so that not only my general counsel and her leadership team could understand, but also help them and make the translation and the connection between what we're doing and how does that directly impact or adversely could impact the business if we don't implement controls correctly. Was a good 4.5 years of going through that. At some points it felt like torture for me because I was very technical in nature, but after a good 6 months to a year, having to switch the way I delivered and approached my security program really made it for a beneficial conversation. And I started to really think about my security function more as a business function versus, widgets and dials that we're just turning and adjusting to stop the bad guys getting in. We did that because that's essentially what we needed to accomplish. But now you're thinking about risk in the context of broader business risk, right? But what's the risk of us not implementing an endpoint security control? Do we have compensating controls? Are we appropriately adjusting our risk tolerance based upon our lack of maturity to a certain extent? And then you obviously use, the other things that was happening in the news, which is you can't open a newspaper and not see somebody getting breached. You want to try to connect the dots between what's happening across the industry with your leadership team so that they can, not spread FUD, right? Fear, uncertainty, and doubt. That's not what I'm promoting at all, but help them understand how, if I was in chemical manufacturing and the gas pipeline hit, I'd help them understand why is the gas pipeline and SCADA systems, why is industrial control systems important to a chemical manufacturing company that has SCADA systems, industrial control systems, and the like, and why we should have the appropriate levels of security controls, right? So those were the types of connecting the dots that I mean, where you take the headline, translate it to, how does it directly impact your business, and then translate it to how can you mature your organization to protect against risks like that, which could translate very easily into your industry.
So I want to call out because I'm hearing this like loud and clear, of course, in my mind, right? Not only do you need to understand the business and the business drivers, whether that's regulatory or brand or whatever is one of those hot ticket items in the business, so that you put it into language that the business cares about, but you also need to be a translator. I feel sometimes like we're required to speak multiple different languages. So we're required to speak English, so that a common person who doesn't have our technical background can understand it. We're required to be able to speak tech speak or legal speak or whatever it is as another full language. And then, for many of us, I know Dan and I both speak Spanish, like we have multiple other foreign languages that we may be speaking with other parts of the business, right? So how did you continue to hone that and figure out, okay, with this business, you said it took like maybe 6 months to kind of figure out how you had to translate things for your GC. What was your process for figuring that out to get to success? Because understanding each other is part of that success.
Right. No, look, I think you hit it on his head, right? Having to be that, the job of a CISO these days versus, maybe 10, 15 years ago, where you were very ingrained in technology. Most CISOs started as a technology background, right? As I sort of mentioned my upbringing. That's what you live with, right? So being able to translate security to technology people, you're speaking in acronyms where like, it's like, oh, you're patching this, you're putting AV.
Right, time out.
All of that nomenclature and that terminology is almost second nature when you're talking to technology people. But when you're talking to non-technology people, it is like a foreign language. So I think the way you characterize it is exactly what I had to do. For me to be able to execute on that was, I've always found, so I've never made a decision to move from a company to another company unless there's been something that I've wanted to gain out of it from a career standpoint and what I think I can bring to the table from my value add to the company, right? So my move from financial services to chemical manufacturing was purely focused on, can I deliver a security program in a highly regulated financial services company in an industry that I never even thought of existed. I mean, I knew they existed, but I never even thought of me moving to that industry, right? So can I learn the business and can I challenge myself, right? I took a bit of career risk to challenge myself to have to translate and learn the business of chemical manufacturing and translate security for a chemical manufacturing company. And that's why I spent a lot of my time, and I usually spend a lot of my time in the first early stages of any company that I work for is listening to what's driving the business to move in any direction, right? What are those business enablers what are those business opportunities that the business is trying to obtain and grow in, right? Where are they actually trying to get to? So I spent a lot of my time meeting with senior leaders and understanding, what kept them up at night, helping. I spent time trying to understand from them what does cybersecurity mean for you? What does information security mean for you, right? So the reason why I did all of that, I'll call it fact finding and internal assessments and learning, was to help me understand how I need to deliver my message in a way that will be received accordingly to the way the audience is understanding, has an understanding of cybersecurity or information security, right? So it took me some time, but learning the business and the curiosity I had to really understand and how we actually operated was what made me be somewhat successful in delivering my security program. The other part of that was, you can't spend, as a CISO, you can't spend all of your time learning the business. You need to spend a good portion of your time staying up to date with technology, because technology evolves. And you also need to build that credibility with your counterparts within IT. If you don't work for IT, you need to build your credibility amongst those counterparts. You also need to build your credibility across folks like audit and other compliance type functions, right? When you think about your program and how does it align to enterprise risk management, and how does it align to the other compliancy type functions like audit and the likes. So spending time sort of doing that fact finding was what helped me be successful. And I've applied that even in my current role at the league, right? Trying to understand where we are with security, understanding what our risk appetite is as an organization, and what is outside of that risk appetite, and helping capture things like metrics to help support the understanding of a risk appetite is very important and key. The translating part, it almost comes naturally, and it's almost organically now, something that at least I hope I do pretty effectively. I try to use analogies along the lines of, things that people commonly know about, right? Like security of a house, right? We all, for the most part, we all live in homes, or we aspire to buy a home. We all have cars or aspire to have a car. We all have valuable things that we want to protect. And so I try to equate cybersecurity to leveraging those types of analogies so that you can understand as a regular common person not doing cybersecurity as a practice. So hopefully I answered your question. I know I kind of went like this, but hopefully I got
No, it was great.
You definitely did.
You definitely answered the question. So let's go back to, all right, one of the things that I've heard you talk about is a lot of times people say, I want to be a CISO, right? But what are the skills that take you from being like a technologist, practitioner, subject matter expert, to running a team, to running a program? Like, what are the shifts that happen there? And I've always heard you ask the question, like, what makes you want to be a CISO? Like, why? Do you think the money's great? Like, what about the job are you gonna like?
Exactly. No, that's exactly it, right? So I've always asked people that question, like, why did when people ask me, hey, I want to be like you, I want to be a CISO. I didn't grow up saying I want to be a CISO. At some point in time in my career, I shifted from, I enjoy being that single point of failure or individual contributor, or that know-it-all for a specific topic. And I enjoyed that for a period of time. And then I gravitated towards, I want to be the person that has a seat at the table. If I quote sort of Hamilton, right? I want to be in the room where it happens.
Yeah.
I want to be in the room where decisions are being made, because I feel like I can add some value. So, I grew into wanting to be in a leadership role. And then I had the opportunity to take on the leadership role. And then I started gravitating towards, well, I want to be able to impact junior level talent and help them grow their careers to get to where I was at that point in time in my career, when I wasn't a CISO. So I wanted to be able to impact individuals. And so the psychological side of leadership, the psychological side of mentoring, and the psychological side of helping see somebody, nurture them from coming out of college to, maybe being a junior, senior level talent, was interesting and fulfilling for me. So then I started to see CISOs that I worked for, and I said, I can do that. I reached a point in my career where I figured out, look, I can actually see myself doing that role. And what you don't always think about, and it's not very apparent if you work for CISOs that do their job pretty well, and I've worked for really great CISOs throughout my career, is one, you don't see how stressed they are. because they almost make their job look so super easy.
The
And so
really
that's
good
the,
ones, you don't see how stressed they are.
you do not see how stressed they are. No. If you have a really good season, you're not going to see how stressed they are. So that's the big warning message that I'll tell you. The job is very stressful, but those CISOs that do their job pretty well make it seem like it's not very stressful. They're focused more on leadership and on development of the team, because the value of what we do as CISOs is really enable the business and help the business understand and be that sort of trust officer, if you will, for the business and the business leaders. But really, the other part of our job is managing our function like a business function, right? Because we all have budgets and P&Ls that we need to hit, and numbers that we need to hit against, target numbers that we need to hit to. But we also need to manage and motivate our team, right? To keep that sustainable level of talent, staying engaged. And so a lot of the skills that make a CISO successful, at least that I'm learning, and again, I still think that I'm learning. I don't think I'm a pro. I haven't been a CISO for 10 plus years. I've been a CISO for man, I think I'm actually getting close to that time period now. I don't know. I don't want to count because I feel old. But
and there's the sudden realization that a decade has passed while you're talking to us.
This is my career
like,
now.
Oh man, I am kind of. But you know, what I've realized is that a lot of what made me successful is, one, being able to be empathetic around understanding where the business is trying to go. So really understanding the business construct, being sort of a motivator. And I think, you know, if I've got any of my current or former staff on here, they might disagree, which is great. But, you know, trying to find what motivates people and what pushes them to the level for them to continue to be great at what they do. I find that sort of fulfilling for me as a CISO. And then once we actually achieve a business target, so if I'm at the table helping a business negotiate a deal with a company that we're looking at acquiring, and I'm able to assess that company and give the true cost of ownership, if you want to think about it from a car perspective, right? If you're buying a company because you're trying to buy their intellectual property, well, who else has access to their intellectual property? Let's do a risk assessment and find out, what does that risk look like, giving them that sort of true cost of ownership for owning that company, the controls and the security that would have to put in place to secure that. You know, I find that very, fulfilling for me, because now I'm able to take the skill that I've been able to develop over the years and help the business make good business decisions in acquiring a company, right? So communication skills are key. Technical acumen is very key. Negotiation and influencing skills are extremely, they're going to be invaluable to you. And then just being able to deliver your message. And I know I do a lot of talking now. Usually I deliver my messages in more concise and precise ways, but being able to deliver your message to your audience in a very tailored, specific way so that they're able to digest and understand. I think those are very good and interesting qualities to develop as a security professional, and things that you would never probably develop when you're in school learning to do security or even IT, because you're focused on, well, how does this widget turn on and how do you turn it off or stop it from turning off? You know, how do you those aren't things that you innately learn in school. And I think, as you start to develop in your career, you start to become uncomfortable with having to learn non-technical sort of things. And you have to, make sure to continue to question, why are you doing what you're doing? And is it actually fulfilling to you? So that's my advice and what I would say. And I'm sure I missed a key skill in there, but as you can see, the job of a CISO, I think it's probably the most complex role, senior level role in any organization. I know you've got CFOs that have complexities with what they need to do from a business standpoint, but I think they're focused on the business and on money and how how is that all sort of working. I'm sure there's some nuances in there, but when I think about my role, like at any given point in time, I need to be down in the weeds talking about security widgets and technology solutions. And I need to be all the way high level to be able to present to a senior level person and help them understand. And then everything in between, which to me is just complex and is almost schizophrenic at times, because you have multiple personalities that you have to deal with.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think
Dan.
Go ahead. You mentioned in there the idea of risk management, and this move from security, from blocking, defending, to more of balanced risk within the organization is one that the transition's been in place in financial services for a long time, and now hitting more of the verticals. But where and how do you see information security and CISOs contributing to the bigger risk management program in the business across the enterprise? And is that a directionality that we're heading towards as a field?
No, it absolutely is, right? Because if you think about what we do in security and information security, if you were to tell the business, no, you can't do something, or hey, if the business says, hey, Tomas, how can we stop all ransomware from coming in? And my answer is, well, we just unplug the internet. Right? We just stop email, right? We just stop the ability to share files and collaborate with other external parties via file, documents that you send an email, you collaborate through whatever collaboration tools. If that was my response to the business, they'd kick me out the room. They say, get out of here. I need to be able to send.
They'd go find another way to do it anyway.
Right. And they would find another way to do it. Right. But my point is, the reason why I say that is because you can't be a security professional and say no all the time. You have to say no within reason, but you have to think about it from their perspective. And you also have to think about it from a risk management standpoint, right? Everything that we do, when you leave your house and for those who go to the office and leave the house to go into the office, when you think about you're crossing the street, right? If you cross a busy street in Manhattan to get from one side to the other to get to your office building, you're doing risk management. You're looking left, you're looking right, because you don't want a yellow cab to run you over, because chances are you're probably not waiting for the light to turn green, right? You're crossing when there's a downturn in the traffic. Why do I say that? Because you're always doing risk management for everything that you do. So why would it be any different for you doing risk management in a company, right? And so as security professionals, you always have to be thinking about, well, what's the risk, and helping the business understand what's the risk of what they're trying to do, and help them understand how do they minimize the impact of that risk, right? How do you apply compensating controls so that they can still accomplish their task, but now you've minimized the risk of them accomplishing their task and becoming compromised or being breached or whatever it is, you're trying to help them do. So CISOs and security professionals need to think in that mindset. And then as you're developing your security program, you have to think in that mindset as well, so that you could put it in line with all of the other types of risk function that you have. If you were in a bank, you'd have a credit risk, market risk, some other type of risk function. Security risk, cyber risk, technology risk should be in the room with those other risk functions, discussing the same levels of risk and how are you managing those same levels of risk, because those risks from a technology risk and an information security standpoint can translate into, whether your business is going to make money or lose money, right? How does that work? It's not easy. It's not easy for me to say, look, I need to hire 20 people and those 20 people are helping us stop from being breached, or I need to make investments in these different solutions to help us stop being breached. Because unless you've been breached, you can't really say, well, I could have saved you $1 million had we had a firewall, right? So you're doing a bit of predictive analytics, if you will, right? You're trying to analyze your environment, analyze the total risk that you have, and then be able to predict and say, these are the cost savings that we would have if we have these controls in place. So you absolutely need to think about risk management, and you actually need to try to quantify the impact of any sort of risk that would impact you as a company.
So you talked a little bit about communicating from like down in the weeds to all the way to the top. Let's talk about boards, because this has been something that's been, talked about a little bit. Is, do you have the right skills in the population of people who are on boards to be able to handle these emerging cyber risks and actually understand them? Because, like, I gotta tell you, some of the board members that are out there, I don't know if they use email. I don't know if they've actually gotten to use an iPhone, right? So do you think that's an issue, and what solutions are there out there for making sure that boards actually understand the stuff that they're overseeing?
So there are solutions, and I don't want to. I'm thinking about how to say this because one is recorded and two is live. but usually I'll say there's propaganda out there that goes to the boards, right? And I'll just say that. So there are communication channels that the boards receive, right? I think, I don't want to, I'm not endorsing this one that I'm going to say, but NACD is a pretty decent one where, the board members will have received, I know if you've been a board member for the past 5 or even 10 years, you probably would have received communication from that organization around the board's responsibility for cybersecurity, right? And what are the questions to ask CISOs around cybersecurity for when the CISOs do present. So I know that there's organizations out there trying and to work at educating board members along the lines of what they really should be concerned about from a cybersecurity or information security standpoint. So that does exist. I've been very fortunate to have board members that do have a background or some sort of background in technology, right? They might not be cyber experts, but they do understand technology and they are able to equate that into, things like risk. The other sort of slice or angle that I would take on this is as security professionals going to present to boards, it's the onus is on us also to educate the boards whenever we do actually go and present. And so I always try to take an opportunity in anything that I'm presenting. I try to tailor my presentation to be educational, informative, and if I need a decision, to be some sort of decision-making process as well, right? So for example, I presented a few times to different boards, but what I typically do when I present to the board, I try to give them a view on threat landscape. Why do I do that? For the same reason that I mentioned early on in this conversation. I try to take what's happening across the industry, right? The headlines that they may have seen, right? When a headline hits CNN, chances are your board saw it. When it hits Wall Street Journal, New York Times, chances are they saw it. So I try to take those headlines and equate those things back to the current company that I'm working for. Why? Because I want to educate. I want to use that as an opportunity to educate them as to why this is important to us, right? And then once I get past that piece, I try to educate them on where do we need to go from our maturity, our security maturity, by giving them an understanding along the lines of risk management, right? What are the risks that we're carrying as an organization? Showing them things like metrics. Don't take what I'm saying as go in and tell them, hey, you've got 50 local admins and 5,000 unpatched machines. That's not what I'm getting at. What I'm getting at is what are the broad sweeping threats that we face as an organization, and then how are we looking to mature our program to mitigate and manage those risks over time, right? So that's the opportunity to connect the dots with what the threat landscape, with what we're seeing impacting our organization, and hopefully that's planting the seed and educating them as you continue to go and present. The other thing that I like, that I think, I do agree with you, Lisa, in that some boards do not have, there's no CISOs that, for many of the boards, there isn't a CISO, right? And I think but I think for many of the boards, there aren't a CIO either, right? So I'll argue that, if you think about CISO and CIO, we're almost neck and neck trying to get to that seat, right? Which one is going to report to the CEO next? It's probably the game that's played every year, right? Should the CIO be, should the CISO? I tend not to focus on that. I tend to more focus on, is my senior leadership educated in what I do? And if they're not, it's my job and the onus is on me to try to educate them and to find those opportunities. So I think most of the boards do not have a technology professional that's sitting on the board, or they'll have somebody that managed. So usually like a chief operating officer that may have managed a CIO, or a CFO that may have managed a CISO and a CIO usually sit on boards. I think we're starting to see a little bit more where CISOs are sitting on boards for certain types of companies. So that's great, because when I think about, semi-retirement, hopefully I can sit on a board, right, and provide that value. But I think the other skill set that the skill sets that I talked about that makes CISO successful is what's going to help us get onto those board level roles, because we need to learn the business, because it's not only blocking and tackling with a firewall, it's understanding, are we profitable? Are we within our risk tolerance? Do we have an opportunity to defer risk so that we can make more money and potentially make investments down the line? I think all of those things play into what it is you're going to see more CISOs sitting on boards. I think there's also regulations that are probably already being passed, where, as I mentioned, making board members more responsible for cybersecurity, whether it's loose regulations or more stringent regulations, I think that'll drive there being a need for more security practitioners on boards.
Absolutely. So one of the questions that, um, storytelling. I love that you kind of wrap this around storytelling. So you relate and then educate, because I think that helps connect people. And we've gotten some more questions in, and of course, like flurry of questions at the end. We're never going to get to everything. But one of the questions that came in was, where do you think is the most effective reporting line for a CISO? People have seen it report to the chief technology officer, the chief information officer, the CEO, the general counsel, the CFO, sometimes to the audit committee of the board, sometimes directly to the board. Like, is there a best, or is it like a fingerprint? Like everyone's a little different and it might work in one case and not in the other.
So look, the last statement of what you said, Lisa, is what I believe in, right? I think it's not a cookie cutter option for each organization. What I'll say specifically is, what I found for me to be most successful in my role has been to align with the leadership that understands security, understands risk, and takes it seriously. And for those watching, don't take that as the CIO doesn't take security seriously. That's not what I'm saying at all. I've worked for CIOs who do take security seriously, and that balance is appropriate, right? Reporting structure, I think the CISO role probably doesn't fit in IT any longer, right? There's just too many conflicts of interest. Mm-hmm. For example, if a CISO worked for a CIO and the first thing the CISO says, hey, we're not patching machines, well, whose job is it to patch machines? The CIO's responsibility. Yeah. So doesn't that make for a difficult conversation whenever you have to present to maybe somebody more senior than you and your boss to say, hey, we have a patching problem. We can't patch machines in a timely fashion. Well, whose job is it to do that, Tomas? Why are you asking me? I'm going to get fired because it's the CIO if I report to them, right? So that conflict is probably not productive for a CISO, and is not productive for the CISO's team or for the function as a whole. So moving the role outside of an IT construct is, I think, ideal for organizations. Now, I've been very fortunate to work with CIOs that do take security seriously, ones that I've worked for and ones that I've been essentially functional peers with, and they do take it seriously and they understand that right balance. I think aligning the CISO function to either a compliance type of a role, so think about a general counsel, right, is pretty natural. It'll work. It's pretty effective. The CISO will have to spend a lot of time translating security to basically a lawyer, but it's a good placement point. Aligning the role to the CEO is probably a good placement point in some organizations as well, depending upon how it's structured. Aligning the role to a chief risk officer is probably appropriate as well, depending upon the organization, if you have a chief risk officer. But I think the thought of having the alignment of the CISO within IT as a long-term strategy, I think that's security, from the years prior. I think we need to gravitate towards being more business aligned, more risk management aligned, and trying to move it away from that typical function. The benefits to that, right? And I know if there's CIOs listening to this or aspiring CIOs that say, hey, I like security, I want to manage security. There's pure benefits to aligning the role to a GC. If there's an incident, the information aligning the CISO to a GC. If there's information that's captured during that incident, it needs to be privileged. You have alignment with the GC, that becomes privileged information and helps you when you're dealing with breaches and whatnot. Having the roles separate from the CIO now gives you that balance, right? Between if you think about what CISOs typically focus on, and I'm going to go very fundamental, CIA, right? Confidentiality, integrity, and availability. CIOs typically focus on availability in that triad, right? They're not always focused on confidentiality and integrity, focus on availability. So in the case of ransomware, if you're working for a CIO and you're a CISO, what do you do first? Do you contain the incident? Do you bring back services?
Yes.
That could be very problematic in an organization if you don't have the delineation of roles and responsibilities when there's an incident of that nature and that I forgot the word, forget it. But you know, when you have an incident of that nature, right? So aligning thinking about the organization and where it is from a maturity standpoint is important. The last thing I'll say on this, and then I'll shut up and get off my soapbox here, is the historical nature of the business always thinking that security is an IT problem. That's what you get when you have security within IT, because the business will always say, oh, that's IT, go fix it. When you move it out of IT, you get a little bit more broadness in nature of the security function, where you're looking at the entire organization, and the business now starts to understand that security is not only an IT problem, it's my problem as a business leader, right? So all of that said, I can tell you at the league, I report up to the chief security officer for the league. So head of physical security, and then my boss reports up to our general counsel, and we align to the CEO that way. In my prior role at the chemical manufacturing company I worked for, I reported directly to the general counsel, and my boss she reported to the CEO for the organization. And then when I was in banking and financial services, I reported up through the CIO sort of structure. But my CIO at Chase had a dual role. He was also global compliance for the organization, global compliance and controls for the organization, as well as CIO for the business. So slightly different mindset, but that's my take on that. I think it depends on the organization, the maturity of the organization, and how they see and perceive security as being a business problem or an IT only problem.
So I have to say, this has been so great. And I know Dan's agreeing with me entirely, because he just sent me a message saying there isn't anything at all that he doesn't agree with. So he feels like he's like hearing himself almost, which is kind of a lot of fun. You're amongst friends, clearly. And unfortunately, our time has basically run out. We only have time for our last question, which is, what's the best advice you've ever gotten from a mentor, Tomas?
You know, I've received several pieces of advice, but the one that stuck out with me the most, and the one that stuck with me the most, has been always try to bring your personality into what you're delivering, right? And what I mean by that, very early on in my career, I was trying to grow my security sort of function and my security mindset, and I was trying to grow into being this security leader. And I lost sight of the fact that I'm a people person at heart. I like engaging and having those conversations with people. I like, you know, I'm a stereotype person. I'm not a monotone person, a robotic person. And what I found myself doing very early on in my career was when I had to do formal presentations, or I had to sort of present risk topics, you know, in more formal settings, I was very robotic and not connecting with my audience. And one of the mentors that I had very early on in my career that helped me said, you know, try to bring your personality into the mix of what you're delivering, because you'll see that your diversity, and they didn't say this, you know, I'm adding this now because I've been able to grow, but your diversity in how you think about problems, how you approach it, where you grew up from, all of the external factors that made you who you are, is going to make you successful in being who you want to become. And so, you know, don't lose sight of the fact that, you know, whatever your title structure is, whatever responsibility you have, you still have a personality that you need to incorporate and help show when you're delivering your message. And that will then hopefully help people connect with you more. And then, you know, the more people connect with you, and what we do from a security standpoint is building a lot of trust with people. The more they can connect with you, the more they'll trust you. You also have to be truthful, obviously. I'm not telling you to don't lie and be an actor, but, you know, try to connect with people. And so that's been the piece of advice that has stuck with me. And I've used that every day. I've used it now, hopefully.
Well, this has been absolutely fabulous. Thank you so much for being so generous with your time, for sharing some of your perspectives, and for making our community richer. For any of our listeners tonight, Tomas and I are actually going to be speaking on Clubhouse, so feel free to join us there. And then the next Mentor Course session we have is in mid-June, where we'll be talking about pink collar crime. So what you need to know about women and fraud. So join us for that session. Tomas, thank you a million times over. This has been a blast.
So much.
No, thank you. I really appreciate you all inviting me to this, and I appreciate those who attended and had an opportunity to sort of hear me out and hear my ramblings. So thank you.
They're wonderful ramblings, and we're glad to have had you here. And we look forward to the next time we can have you get together and chat.
Absolutely.
Thanks everybody else for joining. Have a great rest of the day, and we'll see you at the next event.